So I'd like to talk to you today about Oracle. So I've got a picture of the Oracle from the Matrix here, which isn't actually the correct um, one that I'm talking about. So I'm actually talking about the company Oracle, which there was some massive news about during the week. So if you asked me maybe a week ago, how are Oracle going as a company? What's the story? I would have said they were going okay. They have a very strong brand. They have, a lot of very large companies on their books, but they're a legacy player, and they, you know, are maybe not declining, but definitely plateauing. And their cloud business, while maybe increasing in revenue, hasn't, kept pace with the likes of AWS or Azure. So I wouldn't have considered them an important part of the overall tech landscape, or not as an important part. And thinking about their founder, Larry Ellison, who founded the company nearly 50 years ago, he's big into yachts. He spends a lot of time. He's an 81-year-old billionaire. I suppose that's all the images that come to mind. He's 12 years older than Bill Gates, actually, which is fascinating. And then all of a sudden they release some like stellar results, not in terms of their actual earnings, but their future projections of their earnings. So their stock price like went up, I think 40% day on day during the week, um, which is just mental. And then the news came out, I think in parallel, that they had signed a $300 billion deal with OpenAI. So that is just like crazy. Like there's a lot of big numbers floating around at the moment, but when I think about $300 billion, that's basically the not even the GDP, but the gross national income of Ireland, which is a more accurate measure of our economy. So looks like Sam and Larry will be spending some time in the yacht together, I guess. Obviously, that's a number that's over a number of years going forward, so um, it's not all in one big lump, but it's massive. Like Oracle was founded in 1977, like before I was born, which is kind of long before I was born, in fact, which is kind of which is just staggering. So what does this mean? I think when I think about the wider tech landscape, I think about the earlier internet phase, the early 2000s, and probably before then, you could have earlier versions of this representation, where we've got four primary layers. We've got the consumer layer, which are the enterprise layer, which is the users of software. We've got the applications, which is the actual applications, the ERPs, the CRMs, the productivity applications. Then there's the infrastructure they sit on, which traditionally was on-prem. So you had servers in your data center. You had to have a data center or some sort of server under your desk potentially. And that was the hardware that those servers were made from, which was primarily chips from Intel. Then in the 2010s that changed with cloud. So cloud wasn't invented in 2010, but it became more of a commodity and became more accessible. So AWS appeared on the scene in the mid 2000s, and then just became more and more popular. And I suppose they're really kind of hockey stick growth of AWS, and obviously likes of Azure and GCP and others really took off over the last decade. So we basically had kind of the same paradigm, but basically it was just easier to build because you didn't have to buy the hardware. You could just use cloud services. And now in the 2020s, I suppose there's this, I'm calling it the intelligence layer. So I guess it's in between, or maybe it's parallel to the application layer. I've just represented it as another layer here. But again, it's sitting on some of the same infrastructure. So what does that look like? So we've got all of the infrastructure providers. So we've got AWS, Microsoft Azure. Now Oracle is obviously a big part of that picture with their recent, future growth. And Google, IBM is still there. Mr. Computer, I'll come back to, slightly different. And then those pieces, I suppose, infrastructure providers or cloud services are sitting on hardware. Now there's many more hardware providers. I've just kind of cherry picked a few here for this video. And then above the infrastructure is what I'm calling the intelligence layer. Now, this is again, a small sample of people that are building LLMs. So it's the OpenAI, it's the Anthropics, Google, Meta, xAI, Mistral, DeepSeek. There's many others. I suppose one of the things though that's really fascinating is to think about the interconnectivity between the LLM providers, or the intelligence layer, the infrastructure layer, and then the hardware layer. So this is a little bit of a maybe oversimplification, but X.AI's Grok is sitting on Oracle infrastructure. OpenAI have now just agreed a deal to use a lot more of Oracle's infrastructure. They have a very significant reliance, as I understand it, on Microsoft and the Azure platform. Anthropic, as I understand it, is primarily sitting on AWS. Llama, I think, or Meta have their own infrastructure to some extent, but also are quite reliant on AWS. Gemini obviously have, that's very much an in-house Google LLM. And then Mistral is an interesting. It's obviously a much smaller company, but they're building their own platform. They're not trying to build a reliance on the other hyperscalers, which I think is fascinating. And I think they seem to be going really well so far. They obviously have a bit more of a European focus, which is interesting as well from a geopolitical dimension. But the kind of big takeaway here, I guess, is like it kind of doesn't matter what infrastructure you're on, whether it's your own or not. Everyone is reliant on NVIDIA's chips. Now, obviously, they've like had a massive amount of growth with the whole AI revolution. AMD and Intel are obviously trying to do stuff. The likes of Google and Apple and Meta maybe and possibly XAI are looking at building their own GPU infrastructure or hardware to try and obviously not be as reliant on other providers. Which again, so I think this picture will change a lot in coming years, but it's my best representation from what I'm aware of. But obviously, I'm always learning. So what's that mean? Well, up the stack, if I go back up to the consumer enterprise layer, it just gets a lot more interesting. So a lot of the main providers, such as the OpenAIs, Anthropics, Geminis, are effectively consumer applications already themselves, as well as powering other consumer and enterprise applications. So that's going to be fascinating. What happens to this isn't a comprehensive list of enterprise SaaS companies, but it's a lot of familiar names that people will use on a daily basis. And even in the emerging category, I tried to create a comprehensive list and stopped. I just said, okay, I just need a few logos for this slide. So there's a million more companies there, and this is not at all a prioritized list. So yeah, really, really interesting space to be part of and to keep an eye on.